Hello, welcome to video number 6 of our series of videos about personal transformation. So I just want to mention thank you for sticking around this far. If you've watched the previous videos, that's great, and hopefully you're getting something beneficial out of what we've been talking about so far. If you found your way to this video somehow without having seen the previous videos, please do go back and watch this series of videos from the beginning, from video 1. And if you're coming back for yet another exposure to these, listening to me sit here and talk, I just want to mention that we are heading toward discussing solutions, hopefully very soon. There is a method to all of this, is where this is going to, and a purpose to all of these things we've been discussing. And it does have to do with an approach to how we can produce or create, to produce improvement in our life through an approach that is based on the idea of solving the causes of various types of conditions that we may have in our life that I've called these subconscious patterns. And they're referred to in many other ways. And we talked about that a little bit in one of these videos. But there is an approach that this is all heading toward, a solution. And it has to do with actually understanding what is causing these things that we don't like in our life, such as whether it's stress, anxiety, self-sabotage, self-limitation, low self-esteem, whatever it may be. And as I've tried to say in one of the videos, that these patterns, I call them, can look different in many different ways, but there is a fundamental aspect of how these things work that is essentially the same regardless of what type of pattern that this may look like. And we discussed that in one of the videos as well. So I just wanted to emphasize a little bit on this one, that we are getting close to starting to talk about how the solution works. So far it's been a little bit like discussing, kind of learning about your computer system in a way. So, and we are comparing our lives a little bit to being like a computer in some ways, and that we humans are kind of complicated. It's sort of, this is a complex subject that we're trying to discuss. So I'm trying to balance, how do I keep people's attention? How do I keep your attention? And in this age of instant satisfaction and fast I guess instant entertainment. So much of our world these days is like it was Instagram. I don't even know if that's the case, that's a thing anymore. But social media and the way that the internet and the way that our society is these days, is that there tends to be a very high demand on how do we catch somebody's attention and keep somebody's attention. And this is just something that can't be discussed in a 30-second blip. I'm sorry, but it's just not. So I've tried to do this in a way that we can explain what's going on, because I feel it's important to understand what's happening. And then if we've got this stuff going on in our life that is making life uncomfortable or disrupts our life or is not beneficial in whatever manner that we want to say, that how do we address doing something about this? Well, part of it is, at least I believe, is an understanding what is causing these things to be happening in our life. Because the understanding of what's happening is the key to knowing how do we change it. So anyway, back to what we were going to be talking about. So I'm trying to now bring together a little bit of what we've discussed so far. So we talked about how we form our experiences of life that begins from the time we're born and lasts for about 5 or 6 years. And we go through a process that I have kind of described as being similar to like a configuration process, and that our human system can be thought of as being similar to like what we would know as a computer system in some ways. So we can also compare to this configuration process on our computer. So we could think of what we've been looking at now is kind of coming to a brief description of different areas of our computer system. So there might be the monitor. So we've been talking about, well, like the monitor, this is what the monitor does. It shows us the results, and the keyboard gives us a way of how we enter the instructions or enter things into the computer to do things with it. And this box over here is the computer processor. And then inside the box there is a system that makes it all work, that I was talking about in the last video, that we're calling the subconscious. And in the system there are these programs that do different things and produce different results on our computer. Some programs can produce effects or results that are maybe not what we would prefer to have on our computer. And so this compares a little bit with what I keep calling as these unwanted programs or unwanted patterns, subconscious patterns, that we can also think of as being like subconscious programs on our computer system. On a computer we can have programs that are corrupted, or they're not functioning, they don't function right, or for whatever reason they produce results that we don't like. So to do something about that, to stop getting the results that we don't want on our computer, we need to go find what is causing that to happen. So we can do a search. We look for the program that is the source of what is producing these results, and we delete that program. But now the thing is that some programs on the computer, we don't have access to be able to just tell it to delete. And part of what I've been trying to describe is we have a similar situation with the patterns or the subconscious programs in our human life that may be producing results that we don't like, and that the way our system operates is that the programs that are doing these things or that producing these results are kept in a way that we don't have access to them from our conscious level thinking, or our conscious level area of life, of our consciousness. And that was a bit of what we were discussing in the last video about the subconscious. So these programs that we're talking about that cause these unwanted conditions, even though they may look very different, are very similar in how they function. And the thing about this that makes it tricky is that these are stored by the subconscious, that operating system we talked about, in a way that we don't have access to them directly. Much like those critical system files that require a password of some kind to get to those. So, I hope I'm not repeating myself too much. I do have a tendency to do that, and I'm sorry if I do repeat. But in my line of thinking, it seems to emphasize certain things that need to be understood. So, what I would like to do now is to get a little bit more into the effects that these unwanted programs, how they're formed, what the patterns or these programs typically tend to be like, how those get formed, and how they can, a little bit about how those can show up in life. So, because we're getting pretty close to talking about what is the solutions. So, when we're born, we come into the life not really knowing what is happening. And so a part of what's going on is we're just trying to figure out what's going on, what's happening. So we're looking at things that are going on around us, and we're interpreting our experiences, and we draw conclusions about that. And the conclusions that we come to are then recorded by the subconscious. And those conclusions that we come to that are recorded become the basis of the instructions. Now, the subconscious is able to actually produce experiences that we have in life. And to go into much more detail is a little beyond the scope of this one, but we want to understand that the programs that are going on in the subconscious is very much responsible for what goes on in what we're experiencing in life. So we're wanting to look at, so it's about what are the programs that are responsible for what's going on. So how do these things happen? So let's suppose that as a child that there was some kind of an experience of some kind. And let's suppose that the response to that experience of some kind is upsetting to the child. So that means that we've got emotions that are happening. So there may be strong negative emotions that were related to this. And then we form these ideas that we interpret what is what this experience means. Now, the interesting thing is that as a child, we tend to kind of make up, there's a number of things that happen. For one thing, there's a tendency to misunderstand what the circumstances are, to misinterpret the conditions, or we could misunderstand what was said, misunderstand what the conditions or the circumstances were. And then we tend to make up stories about what we think it means. And these stories of what we think that it means then becomes what we decide is what is true. And when we decide what is true, that truth then becomes what I refer to as our beliefs about what is so in the world. And the beliefs of what is so is what the subconscious takes as its instructions, and then builds our further experiences later in life on whatever that truth was that we decided. And I think we talked about this a little bit before, about things like if what we decided was something like life is hard, then that's what it is that we experience. So let's try a couple of examples. Let's say that, for example, how one of these things might happen. That let's suppose one of my favorite examples is, let's say you've got a young child, maybe 2 or 3 years old, and the child is at their little table, kiddie table, and there's cookies and milk there, and we're just having an okay time having our cookies and milk. And then let's suppose something happens. We don't know exactly what or how, but somehow or other the milk is now spilled on the floor. So now we've got the child is now faced with a problem, right? The problem is the milk is now on the floor and we're confronted with this. So there could be upset involved initially about this now that we're confronted with this problem. So there are emotions that are initially involved with the response to this situation, and the child will be thinking things like, I'm in trouble now. This is my fault. I'm did this wrong. But now let's add to it. Let's say that an adult comes into the room and says something to the child. It could be something as simple as, look what happened. And the child can have a wide array of ways to interpret that, right? So it could be, look what happened. It could be that there's no more to it than that. It depends on how the child is sort of like predisposed to interpret things. But let's suppose it gets a little more complicated in that let's say this adult says something along with that, like, look what happened, you're stupid. Well, from the child's point of view, the child looks at this adult as they're supposed to know. They're the authority that's there. So the child is looking at the adult like, well, they're supposed to know. They're supposed to know. They're telling me this must be what's true. And if the child then says, well, that's what is true, and accept this idea that, well, then I'm stupid. And if they accept that that's what's true, then that becomes what is established as this belief. And the belief then becomes the program that we've been talking about, the subconscious program that the subconscious records. And the subconscious then takes that instruction of that I'm stupid. And then experiences throughout life basically become what I call a demonstration of that belief. This demonstration so we have experiences that demonstrate I'm stupid. So one of the things that occurs in this process is that all of those feelings and emotions that the child had gets stuck inside. I think we talked about this before in one of the videos, that energy gets stuck. And along with it, all those thoughts that we formed in that experience, and then the conclusions we came to, that the belief of I'm stupid. And so part of what's going on, as I referred to in one of the earlier videos, is all of those energies of these emotions and so forth is now stuck in this energy field, and it keeps sending that out into the universe. So that's one way of describing this. The other way of describing it that I've talked about is it's like the computer now has a new set of instructions, and it creates conditions that represent or correspond to those beliefs or demonstrate those beliefs, and it will create circumstances for that to be demonstrated. So then things start getting a little more complicated. So once we've accepted that this idea that, well, I'm stupid, now what do? We've got this problem, right? So there's also an aspect of this that this is like the thing of I'm stupid now becomes it's a conflict, right? Because on one hand, I really don't want to accept and believe and go along, or I don't like this idea of that I'm stupid, but this must be what is true. I've accepted that this is what is true, so that then becomes the essence of this conflict. And this is another aspect of how and why these things are stuck in our energy field, is this conflict. And the conflict can be anything, but this is just the example that I've been using. So we've come to this, the problem is we've come to this conclusion that I'm stupid. I've got this problem. What am I going to do about it now? So at this point, the subconscious sort of kicks in and does what it's designed, where it's intended to do, which is to create solutions, or to create what I call subroutines as ways to deal with this problem. So in this process, the child may say, well, okay, now I've got this problem. What am I going to do about it? I'm going to do this, or I'm going to do that. We might create the intent that, well, I have to hide this problem. I have to prove that it's not true, which is a very common response, is that, well, I have to prove that I'm not stupid. I have to go out and prove that I'm smart. So this creates a lot of behaviors that some people will have to go out to, and they have this drive that they have to prove that they're not stupid, or they have to prove that they really are good enough, or they have to prove that they're worthy, or that they deserve. And it can take many different forms of what are sometimes called survival mechanisms. And that this is something that the subconscious then provides, is once we decide what direction, or we decide some of these things about this problem, what do we want to do about it, then the subconscious will create these subroutines that are sometimes identified as coping skills or coping mechanisms that we may have heard of out there in life as being survival mechanisms or coping mechanisms and behaviors. But those behaviors of those coping mechanisms come from this decision, or this truth that was accepted in this episode, this event that happened that I'm describing, or in this example. Now it can be infinite varieties of situations. But then once those are established, and we create a few scenarios of these coping mechanisms, then those go into effect. And then later on in life, if we took the route of attempting to hide it, overcome it, prove that it's not true, then we may find people that are driven to prove, and in the case of the I'm not stupid, it could be to prove that they're smart. They may have higher education, may have multiple degrees. They will have a pompous attitude or persona. They may be college professors, for example, and have that, I'm important kind of an attitude. People like this may tend to be like hyper vigilant about anyone suspecting the nature of that belief, that underlying belief that was there. We have to make sure that nobody suspects the possibility that I might be stupid, or that I don't really believe that I'm as smart as I put on to be. So these are people that you may see that will they get their buttons pushed and they just blow up. Like, what do you think, I'm stupid or something? So, you may have encountered someone like that, or the subject may be completely different, but the behaviors may be similar. So the other option, so there's like two directions. One could choose to try to fight and overcome the problem, or the other direction is to live out that problem. So these will be someone, like if it was the I'm stupid, then they will live out being I'm stupid. And they'll just be a doofus and, oh, I'm just so stupid. And there will be a lot of other characteristics that goes along with that. They may be an underachiever. They may never pursue things in life. They have a lot of self-imposed limitations. Um, and this is where also um, the behaviors will look like things that we could call self-limiting beliefs that will be like, oh, I can't do this, I can't do that, I'm not smart enough to do this or that, I can't do things because I'm not smart or I'm stupid. Um, they'll make bad decisions, they'll make bad life choices, um, and there will be like a wide variety of behaviors that goes along with that. It could even include self-sabotage, self-defeating behaviors, and then these will be the patterns that are kind of recognized and acknowledged out there in the world, and will probably be behaviors that will have a lot of labels that are put on them by those who are supposedly educated and know these things. And there will be a lot of those labels that are put on those kind of things. But it does come from that original source that occurs during childhood that we have no recollection of as an adult, because this process that's occurring up until age 5 or 6 is going on at a subconscious level, and then about 6 years old it switches over. Well, I was going to say during that period of time it's fairly unusual for people to have much or very much of a memory of things that were happening. We certainly won't remember what that decision was that was made, and memories during that time period are usually few and far between. So we're not going to be aware of what that decision was that we made and accepted on a conscious level. So attempting to say, well, I believe that, I think I may have this belief, this limiting belief, but I don't know what that belief it was that I made that choice or made that decision. It's because as these things occur during this time period when we are not, that the memories are in the subconscious and not really accessible on a conscious level. Now, the other point that I may try to make here real quickly is that part of the factor that's involved here is I referred to that the programs where these things are kept by the subconscious is in this, it's in this sort of password protected area. Is that what that's really coming down to is that even though we may recognize that we have certain behavior patterns that are really not serving us well, that trying to change them from a conscious level does not work, because we are not able to actually access to the source program that's causing these things. So what happens is as we choose our thoughts or intentions on a conscious level, that those intentions are compared to those original programs, those original beliefs that were formed during that configuration process. They are compared for compatibility. So if I'm creating an intent for a project of some sort, or and say perhaps I set up a bunch of goals that I want to accomplish. Well, if those goals and intentions are not compatible with the belief systems, the subconscious will reject them. So this is why some of, or many of the methods and recommendations and suggestions that are offered out there in the world about just think positive won't work for a lot of people that have these negative type subconscious beliefs, because the subconscious will just reject those the intentions, and it'll still create results that correspond to whatever the original beliefs were. I know that went by pretty fast, but this is a very important part of why we are taking the approach that we are, because conscious level attempts to try to change these programs will have very limited or very little effect on the results that the programs produce. So we need to be able to access where those programs are in the subconscious to be able to affect and change them. And I'm about out of time, I believe. So I did talk a little longer than I intended to, and I'm not sure if this recording is going to cut off on me, but I need to wrap this up. So this is just a little bit of a preliminary discussion of how these subconscious programs are formed and how they function. And we want to also get that this is the basis of how we go about creating change if we get to where these programs were caused and formed. If we learn the right way to remove these things from the subconscious operating system, then the effects that they cause will stop happening. And that's our goal, is to clear these things up so that they stop happening, and then we can create a different kind of reality, different kind of experience of life. And so I hope to see you on the next video, or as I said the last time, I hope that you will be seeing me on the next video. And stick around, we're going to have some solutions here pretty soon. So thanks, and we'll talk to you next time.